The millionaire was speechless. It wasn't because he'd lost a fortune or been betrayed. It was because, for the first time in his life, he heard a phrase he never imagined. Card declined. It happened in a fancy bakery, the kind where a cup of coffee costs what most people spend on lunch. The man in the expensive suit, shiny watch, and arrogant posture, Augusto Menezes, owner of one of the biggest construction companies in town, had stopped by just for a quick coffee before a meeting. But in seconds, the coffee turned into humiliation. The cashier looked at the machine's screen, then at the customer, unsure whether to repeat the message or hope for a miracle. "Sir, it seems your card didn't go through." Silence hit hard. People in line began whispering. One guy chuckled. A woman muttered, "Those types, when they fall, they hit the ground face first." Augusto tried to smile. "Must be a system error," he said, trying to stay calm. "Try again." The second attempt was worse. The beep was loud and sharp, and the word declined flashed on the screen like it had been shouted. The manager walked over with that polite smile that isn't kind. It's the smile of someone sensing a show. "We can try another card, sir. It happens sometimes." But his tone made it clear no one believed it was a system issue. Augusto pulled out another card with a golden bank logo. Swiped. Another beep. Another decline. Now the humiliation was public. The manager sighed, crossed his arms and said, "Sir, there might be some pending issue." His words were sweet, but the poison was in the tone. The millionaire swallowed hard. He could feel the heat climbing up his neck. In his mind, only one thought kept looping. "This can't be happening to me." But it was. "I've been a customer here for years," he insisted. "There must be a mistake." The cashier looked at the manager, who gave a half smile. "It happens, sir. We can cancel your order until it's sorted out." A quiet laugh came from the next table. The sound of cutlery stopped. Everyone was watching, and that's when he realized something harsh. When money disappears, so does respect. Augusto looked around and saw curious, cold faces, some even amused by his fall. The same people who just minutes ago greeted him with, "Good morning, sir," now stared as if he were a fraud. Outside, through the glass door, a little girl watched the scene. She couldn't have been more than 8. Skinny, hair tied in a messy ponytail, holding a red apple. Barefoot, but with steady eyes. She didn't understand banks or credit limits, but she knew what humiliation looked like. While the manager offered to cancel the order with fake patience, the girl slowly walked closer, curious, like she felt she needed to be there. "Are you okay, mister?" she asked softly. The question was simple, but it cut deeper than all the laughter. It took Augusto a few seconds to answer. That single sentence disarmed him more than the declined card ever could. He began, his voice trembling. "I'm fine." The manager looked annoyed. "Sir, we have a line. Would you like to leave the items?" The girl looked at the counter, then at the man in the suit, and saw what no one else noticed: shame. Without hesitation, she placed her apple in a small bag and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a handful of coins. "I can pay," she said innocently. "But just for the bread, okay?" The whole place went silent. The manager laughed mockingly. "Look at that. Even the little girl's trying to help." People around began to laugh too. Augusto stood frozen, unsure if he should reply, thank her, or just walk away. Part of him wanted to shout, to remind them who he was, to talk about his bank account, the building with his name, the magazine covers. But none of it mattered, not when a child was offering her coins to help him. His pride felt heavier than his suit. The girl held out her hand. The coins shone in her palm, small and sincere. "Here, mister, just so they stop laughing at you." Her words hit him deep. The laughter stopped. The manager tried to keep his superior posture, but something shifted in the air. For the first time in a long while, the man who bought respect realized that true respect can't be bought. Before he could respond, the bakery door opened. A man in a tie rushed in, sweating. "Mr. Augusto," he shouted, "don't move. The bank just froze all accounts for security reasons." The place went dead silent. The manager swallowed hard. The cashier stopped smirking, and the little girl, still holding her apple, looked at him as if she already knew. Money comes and goes, but dignity, you only lose it once. The bakery remained quiet long after the man from the bank left. The millionaire stayed frozen, his coffee cold, his pride in pieces. The little girl, though, didn't look away. She didn't care about the suit or the shiny watch. She just saw a sad man, and that was enough. Augusto cleared his throat, trying to gather what was left of his dignity. He grabbed his phone, pretended to be busy, and murmured, "Everything's fine now. It was just a temporary block." But no one answered. The manager pretended to tidy up the counter. The customers went back to their drinks, and the laughter hid behind rushed sips. Only the girl stayed, standing there, with the apple in her hands, and the courage of someone who doesn't understand hierarchy. "I told you I could pay for the bread," she whispered. "That won't be necessary," he replied quietly. "It's all taken care of. You don't look like someone who's taken care of anything." The words, coming from a child, hit deep. He looked up. Her face was simple, but there was a kind of purity in her eyes, something he hadn't seen in a long time, a look that could see past appearances, past bank accounts, past the fear of seeming weak. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to hide his discomfort. "Clara," she said with a small smile. "My mum says it's because I was born on a sunny day." "Clara?" he repeated thoughtfully. "And what are you doing here so early?" "I sell fruit on the corner." She showed a little bag with 2 apples and a few oranges. "The bakery lady lets me stay by the door, but only if I don't get in the way." Augusto looked at the bag. Each fruit seemed like hard work, and for a moment he felt ashamed, not of the embarrassment from earlier, but of his own life, of how far he'd drifted from everything simple. "And your mom?" he asked, just to break the silence. "She's home. She's kinda sick. I brought her some coffee, but I guess it's cold now." She shrugged, smiling. "That's okay. She likes it cold anyway." Augusto couldn't find words. A lump formed in his throat. The same man who spent small fortunes on wines he never finished was now standing before a child who thought it was normal to share a cold coffee with her sick mother. The manager approached, clearly wanting to wrap things up. "Sir, if the issue's been solved, can I clear the counter?" Augusto nodded and reached for his wallet. The card still trembled in his hand. "Go ahead." The machine beeped. Green light. The cashier handed him the receipt, pretending nothing had happened. But the girl's gesture still lingered in the air, louder than the sound of approval. "See," said Clara, smiling. "Now it worked." "Yeah, it did," he replied, almost in a whisper. She turned to leave, light as someone who's done what needed to be done and expects nothing in return. But something inside Augusto stopped him from letting her go. "Wait." Clara stopped. He opened his wallet again, pulled out a large bill, and held it out to her. "Here, buy more fruit. You don't have to, mister. I didn't help because of money." Her reply came quick, with that kind of honesty you can't learn in school. "I know, but I want to help." "Then buy an apple," she said with a grin. "That's how you really help." Augusto stood there, holding the bill. Her smile broke through whatever armor he had left. He took an apple, looked at the simple red fruit, polished by her own hands. He paid what she asked, and this time not with money, but with gratitude. "Thank you, Clara," he said softly. "Truly," she shrugged. "People change when someone helps them, don't they? You look lighter now." Augusto didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. As she walked to the door, he felt something strange, as if he'd just been taught a lesson he didn't know he needed. Outside, the sun was shining bright. He watched the girl walk away, crossing the street with small, steady steps, balancing her little bag on her arm. That image stayed with him. For the first time, the millionaire wanted to know someone who had nothing to offer in return, and that scared him. The manager called out, snapping him from his thoughts. "Everything all right, Mr. Augusto?" He took a moment before replying, "Yes, just running a bit late." He left the bakery with the cold coffee in hand and a heavy heart. As the luxury car glided through the streets, he caught his reflection in the window. He wasn't the same man anymore. something inside had cracked, as if the girl had opened a space where his humanity could breathe again. That day, the millionaire didn't go to his meeting. He just sat in the car, staring into nothing, thinking about how absurd it was to need so much just to feel like someone, and how a child with only a few coins and an apple had managed to give him back to himself. That afternoon, the millionaire went home, but he couldn't rest. The girl's face kept coming back, that honest gaze, that simple way of offering help without hesitation. It was as if the universe had decided to strike back, quietly showing him everything he had become. Augusto Menezes had always believed in one single truth. Money was the measure of a person's worth. Since he was young, he'd learned that the world had no mercy for the weak. He grew up hearing his father say, "Those who don't command, obey," and too much humility is a sign of failure. Those phrases became his compass, and for years it worked. He built an empire, bought apartments, cars, land, even people, with contracts, bonuses, and promises of success. He loved being the man no one dared to oppose. He could walk anywhere and be welcomed with red carpets. He truly believed respect and power were the same thing. But the truth was, Augusto had never learned to be respected, only feared. At the office, his presence was a constant threat. Employees stood up when he walked by. No one looked him in the eyes, and he thought that was normal. He called it leadership. "Poor people don't work hard," he'd say, laughing during meetings. "They want everything handed to them." His assistant, with a forced smile, would always agree. No one dared to disagree. He was the kind of boss who confused authority with cruelty. Once, a cleaning lady forgot her badge and tried to enter through reception. The security guard, embarrassed, explained the situation. Augusto had just arrived when he witnessed the scene. Without hesitation, he spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "If someone needs supervision just to mop the floor, imagine trusting them with money. Fire her." The woman said nothing. Her eyes filled with tears. He walked past, satisfied with his own efficiency. In his mind, it was just another workday. But that night, lying in his luxurious apartment, her face flashed through his mind for a few seconds, until sleep and ego erased any trace of guilt. That was the kind of man he'd become, someone who confused coldness with strength, someone who believed that feelings were weaknesses too expensive to afford. Now, sitting in his living room armchair, a half-empty cup of coffee in hand, he realized how suffocating the silence of his home was. No noise, no people, no life. Everything he owned was expensive, but nothing had value. The image of the little girl came back again. "I can pay for the bread, mister." The memory hit him like an arrow through his pride. It was as if she'd seen inside him, the emptiness no one else could see. He closed his eyes and thought of how many times he'd disrespected people like her. Ordinary people, the ones he treated as invisible. Delivery workers, drivers, waiters, janitors, the ones who kept the world moving without anyone noticing. And the cruelest part, he used to be proud of that. Life is war, he always told himself, and those who feel too much lose. But now he was feeling, and he was losing the very thing he'd spent his life protecting: control. That night, he didn't go to his usual fancy restaurant. He cancelled the next day's meetings. He got in his car and drove aimlessly, radio off, just the sound of tires rolling down empty streets. Every red light felt like a pause for reflection. Every street vendor he passed reminded him of the girl. She wasn't ashamed of who she was. She didn't fake anything, didn't pretend, didn't need to prove her worth to anyone. And he, with everything he had, lived pretending every single day. He stopped at a gas station, grabbed a bottle of water. The attendant recognized him. "Good evening, Mr. Menezes. Always great to see you around." Augusto gave a faint nod. Normally, he loved being recognized, but this time it felt strange, like someone was calling out a name that no longer belonged to him. Back in the car, he looked at his reflection in the mirror. "What have I done to myself?" he whispered. The luxury watch on his wrist gleamed, a reminder of everything he'd gained and everything he'd lost to get it. Freedom, lightness, empathy, the things money never gives back. On the passenger seat sat the apple he'd bought from Clara. He picked it up, just a simple fruit, yet it carried something symbolic, a gesture of purity in a world rotten with vanity. And holding that apple, he made a decision. He would find out who that girl was. Not to repay her with money, but to understand what it was about her that made him feel again. Because deep down, he knew the declined card was just the push. The real blockage was inside him, and that little girl, without realizing it, had just hit the reset button on his soul. 2 days passed, and the millionaire still couldn't stop thinking about her. He tried to return to his routine, but Clara's face echoed in his mind. At the office, employees greeted him as usual, with fake respect, but something inside him had shifted. The phrases that once defined him, "Business is war, money is power, poor people are lazy," now sounded hollow, almost ridiculous. By the 3rd day, he couldn't stand it anymore. He left home before sunrise, got in his car, and drove straight to the same bakery. The cashier recognized him immediately, but his tone carried unease. "Good morning, Mr. Menezes. Everything all right with the card now?" he asked, trying to sound polite. "Yes," Augusto replied flatly, "but that's not why I came back." He looked around, searching for the little girl. She wasn't there. He stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, watching the street, until he spotted a boy selling candy. "Hey, kid, the little girl who sells fruit around here. You know her? You mean Clarinha?" "Yeah, she's usually by the square, near the newsstand." Augusto thanked him and drove there. The neighborhood looked different when seen without tinted windows. Simple houses, cracked sidewalks, tired faces heading to work. And there she was, sitting on a wooden crate, arranging apples and oranges in a makeshift box. The sun hit her face, but her smile didn't fade. There was a calmness in her expression that he couldn't name. For a moment, Augusto just stood there, watching. A horn honked behind him. He didn't even hear it. When he finally walked closer, Clara looked up, eyes wide in surprise. "The man from the bakery," she said. "The card worked, right?" "It did," he replied with a shy smile. "And thanks to you, I think something else started working in here too." He pointed to his chest. She laughed, not really understanding. "Came to buy more apples." "Actually, I came to see how you're doing." "I'm good. My mom too." She puffed up with pride. Yesterday she managed to eat her first bowl of soup since she got sick. Augusto felt his heart tighten. That little girl, who had almost nothing, still found reasons to be grateful, while he, surrounded by luxury, spent his days complaining. "Do you live around here?" he asked. "Yeah, right there." She pointed to a small old house at the end of the street. "But the roof leaks when it rains. We put buckets under it. It's kind of funny. Sounds like the house is singing." He laughed, and immediately felt ashamed for it. Clara talked about her own hardship like someone describing a broken toy, with honesty, with peace. Augusto stayed quiet for a moment until she asked, "What do you do for work again, sir?" He hesitated. For the first time, he wasn't proud to answer. "Construction." "So you're a builder?" she said, excited. "My grandpa was one too." It took Augusto a second to process that. No one had called him a builder since he was young. But the way she said it didn't sound insulting. It sounded like respect. "Yeah, something like that," he replied. Clara smiled and went back to arranging the fruit. A soft breeze lifted a few strands of her hair. Augusto watched every little move, not even knowing why. Seeing that simplicity felt like finally seeing what truly mattered. Suddenly, a noise cut through the calm. Across the street, a woman shouted for help. "Clara! Clara!" It was her mother's voice. Augusto turned and saw the woman struggling to stand by the door, coughing hard. The girl ran immediately, dropping the fruit all over the ground. He followed her. Clara's mother looked pale, her face sweaty, her eyes sunken. "Mom, lie down. I'll be right back," said the girl, trying to help. But the woman lost her strength and nearly fell. Augusto rushed forward and held her by the shoulders. "Easy, ma'am. Just breathe." I'm fine," she tried to say, but her voice gave out. Without thinking, he carried her inside. The house was simple, almost empty. A worn-out mattress, an old stove, and a faint smell of medicine and hope. Augusto looked around and felt the weight of it all. "She's been like this since yesterday," Clara explained. "I was going to buy her medicine, but—" "You didn't have money, right?" he completed. She nodded, embarrassed. The millionaire grabbed his phone. "What's her full name?" "Helena." "Miss Helena, okay." In minutes, he called a private doctor and asked for immediate care. Clara stared at him, wide-eyed. "You're really calling a doctor for us?" "Of course I am. But that's expensive, mister. Really expensive. Leave that to me." She stayed quiet for a moment, then asked softly, "Why?" "Because once someone did something for me when I needed it most. Now it's my turn." The doctor arrived in half an hour, checked her condition, prescribed medicine, and praised Clara for her bravery. When they left, the sun was already setting. The little girl looked at him, her eyes glowing with wonder. "Thank you, mister." "Don't thank me. You're the one who reminded me what it means to be human." Augusto left with his heart racing. He couldn't even explain what he was feeling. It wasn't guilt and it wasn't pity. It was something deeper. It was like he'd just found a part of himself he thought was gone. From the car seat, he saw the sunset reflecting off the windows of the modest homes. He thought of all the people he had ignored, and how that little girl had reminded him that a man's worth isn't in his balance, but in his choices. And right then, alone, with the sky turning orange and his hands still shaking, he made a decision. He wouldn't just help Clara and her mother, he was going to change everything, for real. The days that followed felt completely different from anything Augusto had known. The man who used to start every morning with meetings, reports and short commands now woke up thinking about an 8-year-old girl. The memory of that simple gesture, those small coins, the words, "I can pay for the bread," had completely shifted his way of thinking. At the office, nothing seemed to carry the same importance. The numbers on the reports didn't excite him. The record profits that once filled him with pride now felt hollow, pointless. During a meeting with investors, the voices around him started to fade, as if far away. His mind was somewhere else. "Mr. Augusto, are you listening?" one of the directors asked. He blinked, waking from his thoughts. Yes, of course. But he wasn't. The truth was, he didn't want to be there anymore. He wanted to know if Clara and her mother were okay. That night, while eating dinner alone, he looked down at his fancy plate and felt a lump in his throat. The food had no taste. He pushed it aside, stood up, and went to the window. From his apartment balcony on the 27th floor, he could see the city lights stretching to the horizon. Each light represented a story, a life, a problem, a bit of hope. And among them, there was one small, humble home with a leaky roof, where a little girl still smiled, even with a wet floor. The next morning, he got in his car and drove to Clara's neighborhood, this time without the suit. He wore a plain shirt and simple pants. He didn't want to be the millionaire. He just wanted to be a man trying to fix what was broken inside himself. When he reached the corner, he saw Clara sitting on the same wooden crate, arranging her fruit. But something had changed. Her mother, Helena, was there, pale but smiling. She looked a little better. "Look who's back!" Clara shouted, grinning. "The card guy!" He laughed, a bit embarrassed. "Are you still going to call me that?" "Well, that's how I met you." She shrugged and giggled. "And now the card works, right?" "It works now," he said. "But honestly, I learned that some things can't be bought with any card." Her mother walked closer, leaning on a chair for balance. "You're Mr. Augusto, right?" she asked weakly. "The doctor said you were the one who paid for the visit." "I just did what anyone would do." "No, that's not what anyone would do." She smiled softly. "God sent you to take care of us." Augusto felt his chest tighten. He, who had always doubted anything that couldn't be measured or touched, was now listening to a humble woman speak about destiny with such certainty. He didn't know what to say. He just nodded, respectfully. Clara tugged at his arm. "Want to see something?" She led him to the back of the house. There was a small garden there, with little plants growing inside old paint cans cut in half. "I planted these to sell when they grow. We're going to have our own stand someday," she said proudly. "That way, Mum won't have to get sick from working too much." Augusto knelt down and touched the soil. Those fragile plants, fighting for space, looked just like the girl herself, growing strong even where no one believed it was possible. "Can I help you with this?" he asked. "You can," Clara smiled. "But you gotta get your hands dirty too, okay?" He laughed, took off his expensive watch, and started working the soil beside her. From the window, Helena watched with tears in her eyes. The man who once seemed to have the world in his hands was now on his knees, helping a child plant hope. "Do you have kids, sir?" Clara asked while fixing a mint sprout. "I did," he said quietly. "But they live far away. Why don't you go see them?" He took a deep breath. "Because I let work take the place of family. And when I realized it, it was too late." The girl was silent for a moment, then said, "If you want, you can share my mom. She takes good care of everyone." Augusto smiled, but the smile came wet. Clara said it with such innocent kindness that it hurt. Without knowing, she was offering exactly what he'd been missing all along, real affection with no interest attached. Before leaving, he quietly left a bag of groceries by the door. Helena tried to refuse. "You've already done too much." "I haven't done anything," he replied. "I'm just giving back what I've been given." Back in the car, he turned on the engine, but didn't drive away. He stayed there, watching through the rearview mirror. He saw Clara sitting again on her little crate, humming while arranging the fruit. And in that moment, he finally understood something he never had before. True wealth isn't what you own. It's what you awaken in others, and what they awaken in you. In the following days, he started visiting the neighborhood more often. Sometimes he brought new fruits, sometimes tools to help in the garden. Other times, he just sat and listened to Clara and her mother's stories. They always welcomed him with the same simple smile, without any formalities, and each time he felt more at home. The man who once lived surrounded by flatterers was now discovering the joy of listening without hurry, of laughing without fear, and of feeling useful without needing to prove his worth. But what he didn't know yet was that this reunion, which seemed so ordinary, was about to change his life forever. Because soon, the little girl who had taught him the value of simplicity would also become the reason for a gesture the whole world would notice. Augusto began returning to that neighborhood every day. Sometimes early in the morning, he would watch from afar, people heading to work, kids going to school, vendors setting up their stalls. It was as if that place, simple, noisy, alive, gave him something the luxury never had, belonging. But he didn't want anyone to know who he really was. He didn't want to be the millionaire from the bakery or the rich man trying to ease his guilt. He wanted to do good with no witnesses. He wanted to rediscover himself in silence. He started small. He secretly paid for the milk the corner store delivered to Clara's house. He bought Helena's medicine under her name and asked for anonymous delivery. He left discreet envelopes at the local school with enough money for the neighborhood kids to buy supplies. No one knew where the help came from, and that was exactly how he wanted it. But inside him, a fear was growing, a fear of being found out, a fear that once people knew who he was, everything would go back to the way it was before. Appearances, interest, distance. One afternoon, while tending to the garden with Clara, she said with a bright smile, "You know, there's a good person around here." "Oh, really?" he asked, pretending to be curious. "Yeah," she said eagerly. "Someone so good they've been helping everyone without wanting to be seen." "And how do you know that?" "I just feel it," she said with conviction. Things started getting better all of a sudden. Mum has her medicine. The neighbor got a job. The shop lady stopped crying. That's God, but also someone with a good heart. Augusto looked at her and smiled. Sometimes, Clara, people who help just don't want to be noticed. "I know," she said, gazing at the sky, "but I think people who do good shouldn't have to hide." His next words got stuck in his throat. For a second, he wanted to tell her the truth. He wanted to say it was him behind all of it, but he couldn't. He was afraid to ruin that purity, so he simply said, "Maybe you're right." Meanwhile, Helena was getting better every day. She could walk around the house again, make her own coffee, and even help Clara sell fruit. But she noticed something different in Augusto, a kind of tiredness in his eyes, a quiet guilt he tried to hide behind kind gestures. "You look like a man carrying a heavy load," she said one late afternoon. "Maybe I am," he replied quietly. "I just don't know how to let it go." "By doing good without fear," Helena answered softly. "Kindness isn't something you trade. It's what sets you free." Her words echoed in his mind long after she said them, and that night, as he drove back to his apartment, an idea began to form. He wouldn't just help those two anymore. He would change the lives of every child in that neighborhood, but without anyone knowing it was him. Over the next few months, he started working on a secret project. Using another company under a different name, he hired architects, bought an empty lot beside the town square, and began construction. It was going to be a school, simple but modern, with a library, computers, toys, and a cafeteria that would serve food all day long. Everything would be free. The engineers thought it was strange, this mysterious client who paid everything up front and didn't want his name on any plaque. But Augusto only said, "Build it as if it were for someone you truly love." As the construction went on, he kept visiting Clara and Helena, but his heart grew heavier each time. He knew that sooner or later he would have to tell them the truth, and he feared the look in their eyes once they discovered who he really was. One morning, Clara showed up acting different. There was curiosity in her gaze. "Mister, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Go ahead." "Do you know the man who's building that school nearby?" Augusto faked confusion. "What school?" "The big one, with the colorful walls and swings. The builder said it belongs to a millionaire." He hid a small smile. "Is that so?" "Yep," she said, excited. "And the funny part is that the builder also said this man plans to name the school after a girl called Clara." Augusto's heart stopped. For a moment he felt his disguise starting to fall apart. But the girl went on. "Must be just a coincidence, right?" He swallowed hard. "Yeah, must be." In the following days, the whole neighborhood started talking. People wondered who the generous man could be. Some said it was a politician. Others thought it was a foreign businessman. But nobody guessed the truth. One evening, watching the sunset from his apartment window, Augusto realized he couldn't hide anymore. The project was almost done. And as much as anonymity made him feel safe, he understood that keeping his good deeds secret also meant staying hidden from himself. The next morning, he drove to the construction site. The workers recognized him, but he motioned for silence. He stepped inside the half-finished school, walking through white hallways that smelled of fresh paint. Each classroom felt like a quiet apology for his past mistakes. Running his hand over the new desks, he thought about how fate works in strange ways. A declined card had brought him here. A little girl with a handful of coins had taught him more than any business book ever could. Right then, he made up his mind. The school would open soon, and he would tell the truth himself, but not with a speech full of numbers and titles. He wanted Clara to know the real reason it all existed. The man who once craved attention was now about to be recognized by only one child, the only person who had truly seen him when no one else did. The school was almost finished. The walls were painted, the courtyard was taking shape, and children from the neighborhood gathered outside every day to peek through the fence, curious about what was being built. From a distance, Augusto watched with a mix of pride and fear. It was the first time in years he had created something that wasn't meant to make profit, and strangely, it was the only thing that made him sleep peacefully. His life had changed completely. The fancy clothes stayed in the closet. He dismissed his driver. He began driving himself, walking more, greeting people on the streets. The man who once couldn't remember his employees' names now asked about their kids, cared about their stories, and listened, truly listened. His co-workers started noticing. "Are you all right, Mr. Augusto?" asked the finance director. "You've stopped coming to meetings. You don't care about contracts anymore." "I'm great. Just finally busy with something that actually matters." And it was true. $1 million meetings no longer excited him. Reports, targets, business dinners, all of it felt so small now. He spent his afternoons visiting poor areas, watching families, quietly helping where he could. No cameras, no headlines. He had learned that giving without being seen is the purest kind of freedom. But what surprised him most was how much it changed him inside. He found himself smiling for simple reasons. He wanted to talk, to hear children's laughter, to touch the soil in Clara's garden. Little by little, the cold, proud man he once was started to fade away, and the new Augusto began to grow, slowly, like someone finally learning how to breathe outside his own ego. Clara noticed the change, even if she didn't fully understand it. "Mister, you seem different lately." "Different how?" he asked. "Before you barely talked and kept your eyes down. Now you talk smiling and look people in the eyes," he chuckled. "Guess that's because someone taught me to see things better." "Who?" "A little girl who thought she could buy a loaf of bread." Clara laughed out loud, covering her mouth. "I really thought I could." The moment was simple, yet carried an incredible weight. That little girl had given him back the humanity that money once took away. And now, every time he looked at her, Augusto felt a quiet urge to do more. Not to make up for anything, but to keep growing. Meanwhile, the school was finally finished. Helena helped however she could, sewing curtains, organizing donations, insisting on making coffee for every worker. Clara brought fruits and told stories to the children passing by. The whole neighborhood seemed to breathe a new kind of hope, but no one had a clue who was behind it all. On the night before the grand opening, Augusto couldn't sleep. The school lights were on, everything ready, and a white cloth covered the main gate's plaque. Inside him, anxiety and fear wrestled. It was time to step forward, time to show what money can do when it stops feeding ego and starts serving purpose. In the morning he dressed plainly. No suit, no fancy watch, no driver. He got in his car and drove to the neighborhood. When he arrived, the street was packed. Families waited eagerly for the ceremony to begin. Clara and Helena sat in the front row, smiling, unaware of what was coming. The mayor spoke into the microphone, thanking the generous benefactor who chose to remain anonymous. But at that moment, Augusto realized anonymity was no longer courage. It was fear, fear of facing his own past, and he was done hiding. He slowly walked up to the stage. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some recognized him from old TV interviews and business magazines. Others just stared curiously. He took the microphone, took a deep breath, and began, "A few months ago, my card was declined at a bakery." The crowd laughed, unsure where he was going with that. "And that day, for the first time, I was declined as a human being too." His voice trembled, but he kept going. "A little girl reached out when everyone else laughed. And that's when I realized all the money I had never bought what truly matters, dignity, kindness, and respect." The laughter faded into silence. Clara's eyes widened. Helena covered her mouth. He went on, "This school exists because of her. Because it was this little girl, with a few coins in her hand and a heart too big for her chest, who taught me what generosity really means." He nodded to the workers, who removed the cloth from the plaque. The crowd erupted in applause as they read the name, Clara Light Community School. Clara froze. Tears streamed down her face before she could stop them. She ran onto the stage, threw her arms around him, and held him tight. "It was you?" she asked between sobs. "It was me," he replied, smiling softly. "But deep down, you're the one who built all this." The audience stood up, clapping. Helena cried. Cameras flashed, but Augusto barely noticed. In that embrace, everything made sense. There was no rich man, No poor girl, just two souls who met right where pride ends and love begins. That afternoon, the man who once lived for vanity finally set himself free. He donated part of his fortune to keep the school running and to help others like it. He sold his luxury car, traded his apartment for a modest house near the same neighborhood where everything began. And every day, he made sure to visit, to sit in the yard and listen to the children's laughter. He no longer needed recognition. The peace he'd been chasing his whole life was in that sound, the sound of innocence he had almost lost. The crowd was still cheering when Clara pulled away, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Her smile trembled between laughter and crying. Helena, deeply moved, slowly made her way to the stage, leaning on a teacher's arm. "I told you God sent you to take care of us," she said, her voice shaking. Augusto knelt and held her hands gently. "No, Mrs. Helena, he sent me to you, so I could learn how to be human." The camera flashes mixed with the roar of applause, but the silence inside him was louder. For his whole life, Augusto thought recognition meant power. But standing there, before that crowd, and before the child who once saved him from his own arrogance, he understood true power is turning scorn into gratitude. "This school," he continued, holding the mic firmly, "isn't a gift, it's an apology." People looked at each other in surprise. He went on, "An apology for being the kind of man who only valued those who had something to offer, for forgetting that every person carries a story, and for taking so long to realize that money means nothing unless it touches lives." The audience fell silent. Some wiped their eyes, others bowed their heads in thought. Augusto took a deep breath and finished. "This school bears the name of a girl who reminded me what it means to be human, who showed me that a generous heart is worth more than any card." Clara held tightly onto his coat, as if afraid that moment might disappear. The mayor, visibly moved, stepped forward and spoke into the microphone. "In all my years of public service, I've never witnessed something so powerful. Mr. Augusto, you didn't just build a school, you rebuilt an entire community." The applause returned, louder this time, filled with emotion. People shouted Clara's name. Children ran around the stage, laughing, chanting together, "Clara Light! Clara Light! Clara Light!" She blushed, not knowing what to do. Augusto leaned closer and whispered, "They're clapping for you because you reminded the world what real courage looks like." The girl looked up at him with teary eyes and said softly, "I just bought some bread." He smiled. "Sometimes that's how destiny begins, with one small act that changes everything." After the ceremony, people wanted to take photos, hug her, say thank you, but Augusto no longer looked like the man from the old photos. He didn't pose anymore. He simply smiled naturally, with the calm of someone who finally understood that the greatest luxury in life is inner peace. As the sun set behind the new building, he walked through the school's hallways. The classrooms smelled of fresh paint and hope. There were drawings taped to the walls with simple phrases: "Learning is believing. Kindness is strength. One gesture can change the world." Clara followed him, jumping with excitement. "Will there be classes every day?" she asked. "Every single day," he answered. "And there will always be food, notebooks, and affection." Helena, standing by the door, watched with shining eyes. "You did more than build a school. You gave a future to those who never had one." Augusto stepped closer and said quietly, so only she could hear, "You all gave me something greater than a future. You gave me meaning." Outside, reporters crowded around. They wanted to know how much he'd spent, how much the project was worth, how many millions were invested. But this time, he didn't answer with numbers. He looked at the camera and said, "You can't measure this in money. You measure it in smiles." The phrase spread across the country. The story appeared in newspapers, on TV shows, and all over social media. But what touched people the most wasn't the donation. It was the small detail that started everything. A little girl offering coins to pay for a humiliated man's bread. That image began to circulate again. The bakery manager, feeling remorseful, sought Augusto to apologize. I didn't know who you were. It doesn't matter, Augusto replied. That day, I didn't know who I was either. Weeks passed. The school became a place of hope in the neighborhood. Whole families signed up, volunteer teachers showed up, and companies began donating supplies. His gesture inspired others. It was as if kindness had spread like an invisible chain, connecting hearts everywhere. One afternoon, Augusto arrived early at the school. He found Clara drawing in the courtyard. On the paper, a man and a girl were holding an apple. "What's this?" he asked. "It's the beginning of our story," she said with a smile. "Because the ending hasn't happened yet." He knelt beside her, looking at the drawing. For a moment he felt tears coming, but instead he took a deep breath and said, "Then I promise the ending will be beautiful." The courtyard glowed golden under the sun, and the laughter of children filled the air. It was the same sound he once tried to buy with wealth, but only found when he learned to love simplicity. Augusto Meneses, the millionaire whose card was once declined, was now known as the man who taught that generosity has no price. And Clara, the girl with the apple, grew up remembered as the child who showed an adult what true greatness is. That small act, an outstretched hand and a few innocent coins, had changed the fate of hundreds of people. And that night, when the school lights went out and the courtyard grew silent, a bronze plaque glimmered under the moonlight with words written by him. The worth of a man isn't in his credit limit, but in his ability to share the little he has. Years went by since that day. The Clara Luz School expanded. What began as a small white building with a simple courtyard became a center of learning that transformed the future of dozens of families. Its colorful walls now sheltered smiling children, passionate teachers, and dreams that once didn't exist. And in the middle of it all, Augusto was still there, not as the powerful businessman anymore, but as the man who watered the garden, helped in the library, and brought coffee to the team each morning. The suit had turned into a cotton shirt. The expensive watch had been replaced by a peaceful smile. People still called him Mr. Augusto, but he always insisted, "Just Augusto is fine." His transformation was visible, but the deepest change was quiet. He had finally become the kind of man he once needed when he was young. Clara had grown up. Now a teenager, she studied at the school that bore her name. She was one of the top students and dreamed of becoming a teacher. She often said she wanted to teach what the heart learns when the world tries to teach the opposite. One afternoon she found Augusto sitting in the courtyard, watching the younger kids on the swings. A soft breeze blew, carrying the scent of wet earth mixed with laughter. She walked up to him, holding a notebook. "Writing again?" he asked, smiling. "It's an assignment about gratitude," she said. "The teacher asked us to tell a story that changed our life." "And which story will you tell?" She looked at him and replied calmly, "The story of the man who learned to be kind after his card was declined." Augusto laughed, surprised. "You still remember that? I never forgot." She sat beside him. "You know, that day changed everything for me too." "For you?" he asked curiously. "But I was the one who learned from you. It's just that—" She paused. "I used to think rich people never felt shame. And that day, I realized everyone feels it. I saw that money doesn't protect anyone from pain." Augusto stayed silent for a moment. That little girl had become a young woman, but she still carried the same quiet wisdom that had disarmed him years before. "You know, Clara," he said, gazing toward the horizon, "I spent half my life trying to earn respect, and the other half trying to understand what respect truly means. And did you find out?" "I did," he smiled. "Respect is looking at someone and seeing a mirror, even when the reflection doesn't look like you." She nodded, her eyes misty. The school bell rang, and children ran down the hallways. A group shouted her name as they passed. "Miss Clara! Miss Clara!" Augusto watched with watery eyes. Time had done its job. It had turned the little girl with coins into a role model, and the proud man into a quiet mentor. By late afternoon, Helena appeared with a pot of coffee. "I still remember when you first came here," she said, pouring 2 cups. "You didn't even look like the same man." "Maybe I really wasn't. Life's funny, isn't it?" she said, smiling. Sometimes God breaks our pride just to make room for humility. He held the cup in both hands and replied, and sometimes he uses a little girl with an apple to do it. Their laughter blended with the sound of the wind. It was a simple scene, but it held everything that mattered: peace, kindness, and gratitude. As the day ended, Clara went home with her mother. Augusto stayed in the courtyard, watching the sky shift colors. The sun sank behind the trees, painting the school walls in golden light. Where there used to be emptiness, now there was purpose. He took out his phone and opened an old photo, the one from the inauguration, when Clara hugged him with tears on her face. He stared for a few seconds and whispered, "Thank you." The wind blew stronger, shaking the bronze plaque by the gate. The last rays of sunlight glimmered over the engraved words, "The worth of a man isn't in his card limit, but in his ability to share the little he has." He smiled, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. Inside, he felt whole. In the days that followed, the name Clara Luz School spread throughout the city. Other communities began to follow the example. Business owners, inspired by the story, started new social projects, and little by little, the gesture of a girl who tried to pay for a loaf of bread became a wave of generosity that crossed borders. But for Augusto, the greatest reward was seeing the children's smiles every morning. He walked among them as if stepping on sacred ground. He knew that this was the legacy that truly mattered. Not the money, not the buildings, but the love that multiplies when it meets humility. In one of the final moments of his life, he sat on the same bench in the courtyard where he'd first met Clara years before. The sun was setting, the sky glowing orange. Children played nearby, and he closed his eyes, letting their laughter fill the silence. A little girl approached, holding an apple. "Here, sir, it's for you." He opened his eyes, surprised, and smiled. He took the fruit gently, as if holding time itself. "Thank you, sweetheart." And as she ran off laughing, he looked up at the sky and murmured, "Seems like the world never gets tired of teaching me." The Millionaire's card was declined, but that was the day he learned the true value of life.